everyone. Welcome back. Michael here, as always, for our Street Smart Ventures podcast. So happy you're joining, whether you're on YouTube watching us on video or Spotify audio only, riding in your car, public transport, wherever you're watching or listening to this. We're so grateful you're here. Our episode today is super jam-packed with knowledge, expertise. As always, I just love bringing on incredible people to really elevate their stories, their experiences, as we all just really learn and grow together, which is what this podcast is all about. And on that note, I want to welcome my super special guest for today, Quinna Phillips. Quinna, so happy you're here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
And Quinna is an incredible advocate and consultant. And as we were preparing for our podcast, we really were, as always for this podcast, there's planning, prepping, back and forth on what's going to be the best use of our time. And I think the number one theme that Quinna and I have been coming and preparing for you all is really what we're calling the 3Bs, which is boundaries, burnout, and belonging. And so before we dive right in, Quinna, anything else you want our audience to know about you and the great work you're doing?
Yeah, I guess I'll just introduce myself a little bit. I wear a lot of hats, as most of us young adults in this world do. So I'm a member of the Youth Engagement Transition Initiative, which is a fantastic group of young people with disabilities. And of course, our adult allies. Michael that's how we actually met each other. He was one of the adult allies. I am now, I think, an adult too, technically. And I also direct a parent center that supports 7 different states in the Southwest region. And I get to do a little bit of direct service through that, which I really love. And then I'm also an accessibility consultant. So hit me up if your business needs a little revamp. Just kidding. Well, not kidding, but shameless plug, I guess. I'm a public speaker as well. I started that also through Yeti. It was a great opportunity. Found out I really loved it, and people seemed to not mind listening to me for an hour. So just kept going with that. And it's a great job. I would recommend it to anyone else out there who just really loves to yap like me. We all have something to say. Mine just happens to be disability related mostly. But yeah, I think that's all my hats for now. But yeah, I actually just was working on something on the topic of burnout a couple weeks ago for one of those other companies. So it's really relevant. I've been thinking about it a lot lately. So I'm excited for this conversation.
I'm curious, Quinna, what comes up for you when you hear the words boundaries, burnout, and belonging?
I think the first thought I have is that they are all entwined. You can't really pull out one of those from the group and separate it from the others. I think we think of burnout often as this singular event that it happens, you take a couple days off, you recover. And for some people, that might be how it goes. There's different levels of burnout, obviously. For some people, a couple days is totally enough if it's just a little small thing. But I really want to emphasize that it's not something that can happen overnight. I think in the disability community, we really struggle with the idea of burnout because even just regular expectations of our society are often putting us up at the edge of our limits, whether that's physically, mentally, whatever that is. I think we're often kind of really riding that line between being okay and falling off over the cliff of burnout. So I think that kind of reinforces in your mind that it's like, if I can just, keep moving, if I take a nap here, or I, take a night to watch my favorite movie, then I can just stay on the right side of this line. And I think that's the wrong way to look at it. I think we need to look at it holistically, that this is a mental, physical, spiritual, community, societal. It's all tied together, and it's not something that we experience in a vacuum socially either. This is something that everyone around us is either contributing to your burnout or your recovery, and they can't know that you're struggling if you don't obviously share that. So I think I have a lot to say. I should keep it more concise for just this question. I think the main thing is that we really need to remember that it is, the reason we pick these 3Bs is because they're so intertwined, that that sense of belonging is a huge factor in your mental state. If you are going to a job every day where you're fighting, where you're not feeling welcome, where you don't feel like you have a voice or a seat at the table, whatever, phrase you want to use for that, that's going to accelerate it so much faster. And if you don't feel like you can trust the people around you to help you mitigate that, that's even harder. And I come at it also from a neurodivergent perspective where it can, I've learned that I have to sometimes use other people to let me know I'm getting to that state. Like I've told my coworker, she's become a really good friend of mine, and I've said, hey, these are the things I notice I start to do before I hit burnout, but they never seem to click for me in the moment. That's what's happening. So I've asked her, like, hey, if you see me starting to do any of these things, if it's taking me a couple days to respond to your texts, if there's emails I haven't responded to, or if I'm just, any of these things are popping up, let me know, please, because we had a really important heart to heart one time where I just felt like I was screwing up everything. I was so burned out, and I wasn't aware that that's what was happening. So I just felt like I was just failing at everything, and I was embarrassed about it. So then, okay, I'm 2 weeks behind on this project. I can't tell anyone now because I'm already behind. Where then you get into 10 weeks, and then you get into months, and then it just gets worse and worse. It becomes this snowball. Where I had this conversation, I just said, hey, I'm just really struggling right now. I'm already a month behind on this, and I'm embarrassed. And she helped me figure out, okay, here's where I have space in my schedule. Here's where I can take on. And then it was still late, but it got done. It was fine. And it got done a lot faster than it would have if I had continued down that shame spiral of I can't ask for help. It's already been going on too long. So I said I was going to stop rambling. I didn't. that's one thing I probably should have said in my intro. My kind of ethos, I really believe that there's no problem that can't be solved with community. I think that is essential to us. I think we've kind of started to move away from that a little bit, and I think that we really need to get back there, especially on these topics of belonging and burnout.
No, thank you so much, Quinna. And I think that I want to hone in a little bit on when you mentioned shame, because I can totally relate to that. I think there's times recently and in years, I'm way older than I ever want to be right now, but very deeply in my own past, on one of my very first jobs, there's tons of moments where I also felt that burnout, and um, and how do you think shame stops us from really just setting those strong boundaries and just having those honest conversations?
So I'm going to come at this as a little bit of a nerd. Another thing I probably should have mentioned, if you can't tell, I have ADHD. I'm a little bit of a jack of all trades. I studied neuroscience in college. So first of all, I want to address it from a neuroscience perspective, is the chemistry of your brain is operating differently when you're operating from a place of shame versus like a place of curiosity or calm. Or we talk so much about, I think there's been a lot of like online discourse about the idea of like fight or flight and having your nervous system activated. And that's an important thing to be aware of. I think, though, a lot of times what we're actually talking about is not necessarily that autonomic nervous system, but just the actual way our brains work. And it's not something we know very well, because even like neuroscientists much smarter than me with way more education, I always say the brain's like the ocean. Like even they don't know what's going on with 80% of it. So I think it's kind of a newer discovery, this idea of neuroplasticity. So all of that to say, I don't need to go down that rabbit hole, but all of that goes to say is that our brains operate very differently depending on, yes, where our nervous systems are, but also our thoughts themselves. So if you're coming from a place of, I'm bad at this, I'm ashamed, I just have to get this done because there's no way I could do it as good as I should, like you're already losing. And it's so silly. It kind of sounds silly to just be like, so just switch that dialogue. It sounds like too good to be true, too simple, but really that has been a game changer for me, is just even saying out loud, like, I shouldn't be embarrassed. I'm at my physical capacity and I need help. And I say that until I believe it. I need help. I deserve help. I need support. I deserve support. Even if I'm coming from a place of, I think there's also a whole aspect to it from the disability side where I could get into a whole nother podcast on that, of the shame that kind of gets wrapped up in being a burden or having needs. But it's just really, we all have different needs. We all, not name a single person that you've ever met that has done anything on their own. Not a single one of us. Like you can't come into this world without other people's help. So I think we forget that as we get older, especially. We start to think, well, my coworker and I'll finish that sentence and then I'll tell a quick story. We start to forget that ignorance is not a negative word, a negative thing. Someone being ignorant it's not calling them bad or stupid. It's just that you don't know. You do your best with what you have. And then when you know better, you do better. And so sometimes that knowing better, you have to convince yourself of it. So even if you don't think I deserve this help, even if you think you should be shamed, because there are times where I'm like, there's no valid excuse for why I'm behind on this project. I just am. I'm just struggling. And that's okay. You don't need to know why you're struggling. Just know that we all struggle and we all deserve help for that. So like my coworker, when we first started, I said, we're really good friends now. Couldn't have been further from that. When she first came on, we did not vibe. There was no like open hostility. We just very different working styles. Didn't think we were going to be super close. Not a lot in common. And we had to go on a road trip for work, and we had this long conversation, just the two of us in a car, no boss, no office, no concerns about being overheard. And what it boiled down to was me saying, oh my God, I wasn't asking for your help because I thought you knew everything and we're doing great. And you came on after me and we're already killing it. And I felt like I should have been doing better. And then she said, well, I thought you were already working here before me, so you knew everything and you knew what you were doing. And I didn't want to seem stupid by asking for help. So we were both just struggling on our own, thinking the other person had it so together, while we were both every day coming into work going, oh my God, I wish I had it together. And as soon as we just started talking about it, it was like, there's days where I'll come into the office and I'll be like, hey, what's going on? I can tell you're upset. And sometimes it's just, let me vent about this real quick. And sometimes it's, girl, you got to go home. Work is not that important. You need to go take care of yourself right now. And that goes both ways. We've done that for each other. And luckily we work in an environment where that's allowed. But I think really with work, you get caught up in that idea of like, well, everyone else is fine, but you don't know that. You don't know that. And so I think that the main thing I'll say with shame is that it's cliche, but drag it into the light. It can't live in the light. Let people know.
No, it made me think too, like, because you and I loved again the intersection of everything you shared, like from the belonging aspect, your supervisor helped to create that belonging environment on the job that said, hey, Quinna, like clearly, like let's give you a break, go home, whatever you need. That's like the belonging aspect. It also is reinforcing like a boundary they're helping you enforce of your own, which is, I can only do what I can do. That's a perfectly reasonable and healthy boundary. And then it's addressing the final component, which was the burnout. Clearly, you were showing, burnout. And we can take this so many different ways. I guess I first want to hone in on Quinna. What would your advice be to our listeners and audience members of what are some things to be aware of for our own warning signs of like, cause I know it's all going to be different, but I'd love to hear your expertise on like, like the awareness component of like, we know where there's smoke, there's fire, like not waiting until, cause before we hit the record button, we were saying something really cool about a burning building and like, let's stop just trying to get a bucket of measly water to put out a big old fire. We're like, let's address why is this whole building on fire.
Yeah. I love that I want to say 40,000 things about that metaphor. Like, but I'll stick to that. Actually goes right where my brain was kind of going with the boundaries. One other thing I wanted to say was boundaries are not just for other people. Hold boundaries with yourself. I think that was really a game changer for me, was like kind of gamifying it and quantifying it in a way where it was like, before it used to be like, hey, I think I'm starting to struggle. I'm a little behind on a couple of tasks, but I might just be having a bad week, or maybe I have extra tasks on my plate this week. Like it's all a guessing game of how I'm feeling. And actually this year I started getting really good and really serious about like I obviously come from everything at a very scientific perspective, um, but about like removing all the variables. So I started kind of doing an experiment on myself where I'm like, okay, if I'm sleeping 9 hours and it's at the same time and I'm eating foods that are good for me and that I'm not allergic to, and if I'm taking all of the stuff that just gets me to baseline, this is my baseline, best I can be. If I take all of that stuff and take all those factors out, then I'm able to start kind of identifying, okay, well, I'm sleeping well and I'm not sick, but I still can't focus at work. Something else is going on. And so I set like a deadline kind of, okay, if there's an email that you need to respond to that you just can't right now, write the date of it in your notebook. And when that date hits a week, you reach out to someone to help you send that email. And it sounds silly, it sounds small, but that's really breaking it down to those tiny little chunks of like, okay, an email sitting in my inbox, that's the canary in the coal mine. That's where my brain is not functioning as I would like it to. So
Mm-hmm.
obviously it's going to be different for everyone else, but I know for a lot of people it looks like I'm the guiltiest of this. And for Michael will tell you, I don't respond to my texts like ever. I'm not a good texter, but I will absolutely call. And so if someone's called me twice and I've not answered, something's up. Like, so then I know, okay, there's 2 missed calls. So then I sit down and intentionally reply to every single text in my phone. Because also, I think we love to think of the idea of self-care and boundaries as like this fluffy, warm thing that you do that makes you feel good. That's not the case a lot of times. A lot of times, the thing that's going to make you feel better sucks. It's like how when your doctor tells you should go for a run and then you go for a run and you're like, damn it, this makes me feel better. So it's effort. It's not going to start off fun necessarily, but I don't even realize sometimes how much stress I'm carrying over 100 loved ones in my phone not hearing from me. And then if I take a day and say, okay, it's been 2 missed calls from this person, that means now it's time to sit down, take 30 minutes, answer every single text from the last 2 weeks. The weight is lifted. And then it's in that moment where I'm like, oh, that was stressing me out. And so again, I'm a big notebook person. I write that down. I write down like I felt great after texting people back. Because again, I'm neurodivergent. My brain works a little weird. But for me, I kind of forget that I don't hate things or that I don't love. Like I'll do something and be like, oh wait, I actually don't enjoy that activity, or be like, oh, putting off those texts was worse than just responding to them. Like, so kind of just those verbal reminders or those written reminders from myself. Like I can't argue with myself. Okay, if I write down 1-7 answered texts, felt incredibly good afterwards, then the next time I don't want to answer my text, I can reference that and be like, okay, here's the negative column of everything that happened last time I let myself start to burn out. And then here's the positive column of everything that happened after I started to address those things. So I don't know if that really answered your question, but I'm just a big fan of documenting and kind of proving things to yourself of like, and also like I said, use the people around you. I gave my coworkers some, hey, if you don't hear back from me for a week, that's not how I work. Let me know. I've either missed your email or I'm burning out. But I think also I've asked people around me, like, hey, what traits do I exhibit when things are about to go off the rails or when I'm about to sleep for 20 hours? Like what do you see start to happen? And people have been able to point out like, oh, you stop making breakfast every day, or I noticed that you tend to order Chipotle more when like things like that. So really, again, it goes back to that belonging, that community. You have to have boundaries with yourself to avoid that burnout, and rely on the people you belong to help you identify those boundaries.
Mm-hmm. No, I appreciate you. You gave us a really great overview of, I think, prevention, wellness. I think like you said, bringing shadow into light. There does need to be that honesty, as tough as it may be in the moment or when you're doing it, because it's not sometimes. I think for a lot of us, we're taught this way. I think it's something we all have to learn. And that's like the overarching view, right? This is all learning. This is all growth. This is all personally beneficial for you and it for the long game, in the long run, for your whole life. And I think I appreciate you talking about like it's these actual skills. It may not be pretty in the moment or in periods of your life, but having the skill set of, okay, like how did this, do I feel like this went? What worked well? What didn't? Having those honest conversations. So it's all kind of coming into play. I kind of want to ask you too, Quinna. Um, So where you are right now, it sounds like you, again, no place is perfect, but when you share that experience of when you were, kind of struggling a little bit and you did have that support, what advice do you have for maybe any young people who are listening to this, who are maybe if it's their first job or still really feeling like newer in the job market and just not having you know, any personal experience like on the job, or what would you say to a young person who maybe doesn't know who to turn to for support, or if they maybe have a poor experience in having a conversation with someone?
Oh, I have so many thoughts. I'm actually going to make a quick note in my notebook because I have 3 things I want to hit. You guys can get your stuff ready to go to work or wherever you're listening while I write this down real quick. Okay, so I think the first thing I want to say is I've been talking a lot about having great coworkers and that support in the work world. I don't want to be negative, but I also want to emphasize that's not always safe, especially for those of us with different marginalized identities. I work at a very open, like I have flags and posters with my beliefs in my office, and everyone's very respectful. And like I've had coworkers come to me and be like, hey, I don't really know much about this marginalized group you're a part of. Would you feel comfortable sharing? And can I ask you questions that might not be worded correctly? And I love that because I'm such an intent person. I know, obviously, I mean, don't be going out of your way to be a dick, but like for the most part, I would much rather someone ask me a well-intentioned and poorly worded question about something like in my personal life than just kind of keep their distance. So yeah, again, anyway, I work at a very like open, accepting, everyone's very much there for each other. It's not the kind of I've heard stories from friends of how corporate works and it's different. So I just want to put that out there, that caution that it's not always the best idea to go into a new job and be like, hey, here's everything to know about me. That's kind of what I did. And it worked out okay for me. But I had a coworker at one point sit me down and be like, hey, I know this is your first job. I just want to let you know, like, we're chill, but just be careful, like, with how much information you give people. And I was like, that's interesting. I never really thought about that. So I want to assume everyone's a good person out there to help you, but that's not always true. So just be cautious is my first thing with how much of yourself you share, especially, like I said, for those who might have other considerations. But that goes into my other point of I think it's really easy to kind of get so caught up in making new friends at the office and being so good at your new job that becomes the focal point of your life a lot of times when you're young. And I want to remind you that those connections that you have outside of work, that's going to carry you through your whole life as they come and go. And it's not, I guess all of this is to say, my second point is that I know it's easier said than done. I know it's cliche, but your job is not more important than your health. Your job is not more important than your happiness. I understand we have to put food on the table. Sometimes it's a tough situation, but at the end of the day, if you're in a situation where you're just really, it's chronic burnout, you're stressed to go to work, because that's the big kind of thing also for me to look for is I love my job and I love to go to work. And when I start waking up in the morning and going, oh, I have to go into the office, that's when I'm like, hey, okay, maybe I need to take a step back and assess where I'm at mentally because that's not normal for me. So yeah, basically just lost my train of thought there. I was rambling. Oh yeah,
No,
yeah, I remember where I was going with that. So your job cannot be the most important thing in your life. I mean, I feel like I've learned this a lot quicker because I have a disability that my body will start to deteriorate if I push it too far. But that's my biggest takeaway is I had that mindset of like, okay, that's all nice to say if you have money and you don't understand what it's like to have to put food on the table, but that is to say, even maybe it doesn't mean quitting your job. Maybe it means setting better boundaries or having a conversation with your boss or taking a break. I mean, there's programs like the FMLA Act where if you need time off, your job is protected. So I would really also emphasize like looking into organizations in your area, looking into the laws around work in your state. That's stuff that I just kind of never really thought about for the first few years of my career. But like, make sure you know your rights and make sure you know your escape route if this job does end up burning you out to a point where you just can't sustain it anymore. So I feel like that's all been kind of negative, but my last point will be to say that I think, in the world of advocacy, the one thing I always push is like the people that are already listening to us aren't the ones we need to reach. It's the people who don't like me that I need to go talk to, because I'm in my 20s. I haven't been doing this forever. I don't have all the answers, but in my several years of work, I've found that the majority of the change that has happened has been in those one-to-one situations. And it's slow, it's tedious, but it is that relationship building. So at the end of the day, if you think there's no one that you can turn to for this support, it might just take you being vulnerable first. And I know I said be careful right off the start, but there have been times where like me and my coworker, we both were like, oh, well, that person hates us. And it was like, no, we were just both scared to be the first one to be vulnerable and be like, hey, something's clearly wrong here. Let's address it. So sometimes it does take you just being like, hey, I'm a human. And then all of a sudden everyone else at your job is going to be like, oh my God, I'm a human too. So yeah.
No, I think you're making me think of something I saw in a toolkit, which I loved. It's like the red light, yellow light, green light. And as you're talking, Quinna, I'm like, yeah, like this is such an essential skill and I think you brought up a great points where like, yes, I'm clearly hearing, and I know our listeners are, you had really transformational moments in your personal and professional life when you had those honest conversations, which, side plug, we had some great former podcast episodes, one with Hunter, another fellow advocate, on literally a whole episode on difficult conversations. We've had one with an advocate here in Connecticut, Quinn. We've had, just so many leaders who I think, Quinn, are also really hitting those tangential things that really come into play because these are skills and conversations that we don't always have. These are things we don't always learn, but we need to. But I think you really just hit something really cool on, yes, be honest, but know what you won't share and what you're okay to share. That's where I'm like, okay, red light's going to be like that symbol of, okay, just like with a red light, stop, brake the car, don't share it under any circumstances. That's up for you to decide. Yellow light can be, hey, maybe certain people, certain contexts, certain scenarios that might be okay to share under certain things. And green light is, yeah, totally safe. Just wanted to say, like, does that seem like a tool that, have you heard that before, the red light, yellow light, green light analogy?
So I have, and I thought you were taking it in another direction. I love where you went with it. What I've heard it used as, so there's this idea in the chronic illness community, you probably know, of spoons, where spoons are used as an analogy for energy. So like for a healthy person, you might wake up with 20 spoons and a shower costs 1 spoon, where like, for me, with a physical disability that causes heat intolerance, I might wake up in the summertime, I might wake up with 5 spoons because it's already 70 degrees out, and then I have to take a shower, and that takes 3 spoons for me. So that's always been a little abstract and kind of confusing to me. I do love it, but it doesn't click for me personally. But what I loved was the red, yellow, green version of that. I actually had it introduced to me as batteries, A, B, and C batteries, but I've heard it in that way too. There's all sorts of these, but what that is kind of an energy meter of like where you're at, that I love for like letting people know where I can meet them. Like, hey, I'm on yellow battery right now. I'm happy to hear your presentation, but I can't really give you much feedback because my brain power is really low and I need it for this project, So that's where I thought you were going. All that long story, not short, but I really do love that. And what you said about preparing, that's something, obviously, if you've listened this long, you can tell I'm a yapper, and it's not always, sometimes I'm just as surprised by what comes out of my mouth as y'all are. And that was something big for me that Obviously, I'm a lot more comfortable sharing all my different identities now than I was when I first started several years ago. But even still, I'll write things down in like a yes, maybe, no column. Like the first interview I ever gave, or first podcast, or whatever you want to call it, I was like terrified to even mention neurodivergent. And then neurodivergent kind of became my safe, like, well, people don't know which of them I'm referring to. And like today is the first time I think I've referenced ADHD specifically. And it feels weirdly scary, but I had that on my maybe list. So it allows me to not worry about it, of like, okay, that's something I'm comfortable sharing in this environment, but maybe don't talk a ton about it. Like, so that's something that I kind of have used, but I've never had that framework for it. And I love it. Highly recommend.
Hmm. Um, so we're on the subject of preparation. I appreciate our conversation we've had on the red, yellow, green, and for our listeners, I want you all to really understand. Like, take this knowledge and apply to it in your own life. Could that be something you could take 15 minutes at some point and say, "Hey, what's my red zone? What are my yellow zones? What are my green zones?" You could apply it to your job, to your personal life, really, I think a lot of areas. So I just want to little side plug. This is, we grow faster, we learn faster by applying what we're learning. And I think I may do that too this weekend, actually. But I think too, I'm also hearing for you, Quinna, our red, yellow, greens can change. Maybe that changes where we are or how we're feeling. So it's not going to be static or permanent, sounds like.
Okay, we are so on the same wavelength because that's where I was actually about to go, is like um one thing this doesn't really necessarily fit into our 3Bs, but one thing I just really want to say that popped into my head was um, things are always changing. Well, first of all, I'll kind of address your question more. I know, like for me, I found it really helpful to kind of pick someone whose career I admired and then emulate them, because it was always something I struggled with, where I'm very much more open than the typical corporate advice would be to be. I just kind of think people are people, whether you're at work, whether you're a CEO, whether, whatever your job is, you're a person at the end of the day. You get off work and go get a beer with your friends or whatever you do. Um, so I always was I always felt like I was either too far one side or too far to the other. I never was like, nailed that interaction, perfect amount of information. I was always kind of like, C minus. But our friend Michael, who he's very open, very fun. Like, he's not someone that's going to be like, oh, I should tone myself down for this corporate environment. And he has a great career and I admire the hell out of it. And so that really helped give me kind of a touchstone, while also recognizing that like this is an evolving process. This is going to change throughout your life, because that's where I was wanting to go. What I was talking about before was, I really want to emphasize, like, who I am today wouldn't recognize who I was a year ago, much less 5 years ago, much less before college, before work. I think that's something I have to remind myself of constantly is, we are what we say we are. If you've never run in your life and you wake up today and you want to go for a run, you're a runner. Like, do it. And I think we feel like we have to prove what we are before we're allowed to claim that label. So that was something that really changed the game for me, of like, oh, but I used to be so open. Now people are going to think it's weird if I am more reserved. And it's like, but why does that matter? Like, we're allowed to change. It's just because you have been that way doesn't mean you're going to stay that way. And I think that goes both directions, of like, if you used to be someone who you really felt like you overshared and it doesn't feel great anymore, you can pull back. You don't have to explain it to anyone. Vice versa. If you want to start being more open and sharing your story, you're a storyteller. Like, amazing. I think we're far too caught up on the idea of like kind of proving that we are what we say we are, rather than just being what we want to be. And I think that really, I had a way to connect that to what we were talking about, but now I can't remember what it was. But I think that's really kind of my main advice for young people in the workplace is, like, in a way, I guess it boils down to like, it's not that serious. But if you wake up one morning and you decide you need new boundaries, it doesn't matter if it's your boss, if it's your best friend, if it's whatever, that's you in that moment, and that's enough. So I think really just recognizing that there's no fixed idea of like how you're supposed to act or what you're supposed to be inside or outside of the workplace is really freeing in a way to help you realize, okay, I didn't mess up because I overshared in that conversation. I learned something about myself that I don't feel comfortable sharing that information, and now I'm going to add it to my little list and move forward accordingly. So
Yeah.
I don't remember what my great epiphany to tie it back in was, but I'll stop there.
Well, I feel kind of compelled to share something. So I just turned 37. I'm like, cannot believe that. I remember vividly, as if it happened like a month ago. One of my very first jobs, like right at 18, it's almost 20 years ago. I was working in a retail store, and I'm a naturally shy person. Like, even though like I've pushed myself and you know, um, you know, do speaking myself, do many things you do. Like that's why we're friends and colleagues, Quinna. But I think I clearly remember on the job where the head manager said something to me, and I can't recall exactly what I said, but I know it probably wasn't super professional and sort of not like in a rude way a meltdown, but I think a very strong reaction. And I think what I want all of our listeners to know is I think whether you're newer in the workforce, whether you love your job right now, whether you're open to something new, whether you want to go out on your own to become an entrepreneur, open your own business. I think these are all skills we carry with us. So I think as a society, it's easy to tie into like what we do for this job defines so much of us who we are, where I almost feel like when you know who you are personally, you're going to carry who you are wherever you go. So it really is, again, it's that learning, skill building, sense of self, right? But I remember how, like, after that moment, like, I had the most amazing job coach who, I think as we tie in, like, boundaries, belonging, burnout, like, I remember, like, they pulled me aside later and we talked it out. And as uncomfortable as it was with that manager, because again, I was like, honestly, one of my triggers and buttons was people in authority, like strong men in authority with like a gruff personality, where it's like an instant way to make me shut down and like, and just, there was like a hot button and almost like, what if it was like sent to me? Like, what if I got like, that was just a learning moment where, okay, as uncomfortable as it was, had a moment. I learned from it. I got support, talked it out, and my life didn't end. Like I'm obviously still employed, and I think, but it's so easy. We're like going back to that shame. Like, yeah, I felt shame in that moment, and it wasn't great. But like how humongous that felt at 18, like I think about it now, I'm like, oh, it wasn't like that big a deal now in hindsight. Not to minimize what anyone may be going through, but it's just so interesting from a personal growth perspective of how things change over time. Before I turn it back to you for your thoughts on that, I think as advocates, right, Quinn, I think we are always trying to create spaces. Like the hotel room or like when you clean a house, leave it better than you found it. Like I want to leave the world and our communities better than we than we found it, right? And so I think I just, tip my hat to that advocate and job coach who where with a different person, they could have shamed me and said, like, Michael, like, what were you thinking? Like, that was terrible, so unprofessional. And it's like, it's these brave moments we can have where, like you shared earlier, it's where transformation happens. And I think, and how do we have those brave moments? Balancing accountability, no matter what your role is, So it's creating these win-wins where no one feels like left in the lurch.
That okay, I have so many things I want to say about that. I love so much what you said. It's every time you talk, I'm like, okay, I have a million things to say now. Um, no, but I really love what you said at the end there. I think that's really something that's so easy to forget. We have this idea that, well, things are the way they are because it's the best option, and it's like when you really think about it, most of the cultural norms and things in the workplace that are the way they are, it's not because it's the best, it's because it's how it's always been. It's because a long time ago, some dude was like, hey, these are the workplace rules. And then we just kept going with them. And I think it's easy to forget that, like, we think about historical figures as almost like mythical. It's easy to forget that everything that happens is just some person. It's because just some person decided it should happen that way. And like, it's, to me, again, it might just be the neurodivergence. I've never really been a, well, that's how we do it person. I'm kind of more of a like, but why not person. So I think I spent a long time really just trying not to rock the boat, trying to just like, be quiet, be smooth, get through it, like not really make a ton of waves until I had like the resume to back up my thoughts and opinions. And it was such a game changer for me to realize that like it's good to have facts, especially when it comes to like, I mean, obviously factual things, but and a lot of things, especially as a young person, especially if you're new to an industry, it's really easy to be like, well, they're speaking up in a meeting because they just know so much. But it comes back to that story where we both thought the other person was just doing so great, so prepared, and they weren't. It was just an assumption. It was just an appearance. And like realizing that it kind of that meme of like, oh, no one knows what they're doing, was really liberating. The idea that actually I found most of the good game changing, society changing, industry changing ideas are from people who are fresh, who haven't gotten, like, even now I'm 5 years or about 5 years into my career. I'm like, I have a younger employee who just started, and some of the ideas he comes up with, I'm like, oh, wait, yeah, I wanted to do that when I first started. And then I completely forgot that I don't like how that thing is being done. Like I've noticed it happen even this quickly with myself. Of being young and being new isn't a negative. That's when you really should be sharing your ideas the most. And also, what if you share a bad idea in a meeting? What happens? Are you taken to prison? Is your house stolen from you? Are you not allowed to eat food for like it's okay. The amount of times that I've been in meetings where we throw out 70 ideas and only one gets picked. That doesn't mean all other 69 ideas were stupid. It just means this one's the one we picked. So the idea of like how it is, I really think that's kind of a powerful weapon for young people to have, is realizing that like your voice, at the end of the day, your voice matters, but also you might, just because no one else is suggesting it, that might be why it's a great idea, not why it's a terrible idea. Like, because I do that to myself, where I'll gaslight myself into being like, well, somebody would have thought of this already if it were good. So clearly there's an issue I'm not seeing. And then I'll bring it up 6 months later and my coworkers will be like, that's amazing. Oh my God, we should totally implement that. So basically, yeah, just kind of again, back to the idea of like, just follow your own compass. It's, that's a topic I'm really passionate about. Is I always struggled for a long time with like, well, I'm trying to be what you like. Why don't you like me? And as soon as I just started doing kind of whatever the hell I wanted, that's when all these people started showing up in my life in a really amazing way. And then obviously you have to temper that a little bit in the professional world. You can't just come in guns blazing, but still kind of that spirit of like, well, no, I think it's a good idea. And that's all that matters. So, and obviously with respect, if your boss tells you, well, no, that's going to cost the company $1 million, maybe it's a bad idea. But a lot of times people just are resistant to change. So you might be thinking, oh, I'm getting such a negative reception because my idea is stupid. And it's like, no, everyone else just maybe doesn't want to admit, oh, that would save us so much time and energy. Why haven't we been doing it that way the whole time? So that was surprisingly only my first point in response to what you were saying. But it kind of goes into my other point, which is, again, the idea of like who we are. I remembered where I was going with that. I think the idea of like proving who we are before we are that person, it really ties into our fear, I think, of not belonging. I don't think we talk about this enough. We admit we all want to belong. We all want community. We all crave it. And I think people are afraid that like people will see them as a fraud, or, well, I liked you when you were like this, but now you're like that and I don't anymore. And I think it's kind of that fake it till you make it idea. And you know what? You are going to lose some people, but you're going to lose some people throughout your life no matter what. And wouldn't you rather spend the time now being the most authentic version of yourself and lose those people earlier, rather than putting all your energy into these relationships that aren't actually you? So it brings me to my third point, which is my final one. I had a story, kind of your story reminded me of it. I had a coworker actually pull me aside one time at a conference and be like, hey, you need to tone it down. You're being way too open. You're telling people too many facts about yourself. And this was a disability conference, and I was sharing a lot about my disability. And I kind of bristled at that initially. I was like, hey man, I'm advocating. I'm sharing my reality. I'm sharing my story. That's what we're supposed to do. But then I kind of let it actually affect me, and I started to kind of believe it, and I stopped being as open with people for a while. But then I was at another conference and I had forgotten about it by this point, and I was just being me. And I had a woman come up to me and take me aside at the end of the conference, and she goes, I know this is going to sound really sappy, but like getting to know you this weekend, we need more people like you in the world. I've never met someone as authentic as you. And it has enabled me to be a more authentic version of myself than I've been in years. And I wasn't like, that's not a story about like, oh, I'm so cool. I was just being me. I can't really help it. And it's like I said, I used to be afraid of that, of, oh, I'm going to push people away. But it was the opposite. As soon as I just started being myself so authentically that everyone around me was like, oh, it's safe for me to do that too. It just kind of, it reminded me that one person's too much is another person's thank you for being you. So it's really, again, that idea, it all ties together. The idea of like fake it till you make it, both personality wise, confidence, but also in the workplace, like present your ideas confidently, because even if the person in the meeting initially says this is terrible, you don't know who's out there who's going to go, oh my God, this is exactly what we needed.
So 2 things. So love that, because you're right. I had read somewhere on some newsletter, forgot the whole story, but essentially it boiled down to kind of what you share, Quinna, where it's really it's going to be a tough spot for you to be in if you are someone who will be like that chameleon and change everything about you to please someone. And I say that knowing like I tried that. Like I'm saying, like I'm raising my hand up. I've been there. It's not fun. I can't. We're all welcome to live how we want to. But I just appreciated how you shared. Yeah, like someone pulled you aside somewhere and said, "Hey, a little too much for me," and you said essentially, thanks for sharing that. Okay. And then you had the other woman pull you aside later on and like who just gushed over you and loved that. And I think that proves that I think as we talk about belonging, I think it's really kind of freeing to understand like I'm not going to be everyone's cup of tea. Does it hurt to like admit that? Like I'm going to be that I can walk into a room and there may be people who like whatever reason, like I'm just not their cup of tea, and that's okay. And I think that's really hard for us, but just I think it's also freeing where like I could do cartwheels, bring in presents, whatever. Like it's just like the more you give, the more they'll take, or like it's just the endless pit of just. I think it's so freeing that when we talk about belonging, I think that's such a core part we've talked about our whole conversation is by you being true to who you are, getting to know yourself. That's such a huge core component of belonging. We've as much belonging with yourself as part of the larger communities.
Yeah. And I have to respond to that with just this is kind of like might hurt some feelings, but I think it's necessary to hear. That is such an important thing that you just said, that to me basically means like if you belong somewhere or with certain people, but you're not able to be your full self, you don't belong. That's not what belonging is. It's not just about other people accepting you being around them. It's the difference between a seat at the table and actually getting to eat. Like, even if you finally, because that was my thing. I was like, I'm going to finally find that secret sauce. I'm going to contort myself just right, and everyone's going to love me. It's going to be great, and I'm not going to. And it wasn't even that I needed to be like, I didn't even want everyone to love me as much as I just didn't want anyone to hate me. Because growing up, I was undiagnosed, and I was very kind, but I was not always nice. I was sometimes very aggressive in my pursuit of telling other people to be kind. So I had, I really had this kind of like 180 and then 180 again, where I was like, okay, I'm just gonna make sure that I don't bother anyone. And I realized that like, even if I had found the perfect shape to make people like me, it wouldn't have mattered because they didn't know me. And I used to think making friends was exhausting because I'm like, okay, gotta put on the mask, gotta go be normal and make sure I don't say anything too weird. And then I was like, wait, that's so stupid, because then I'm making friends with people who want to know that made up person, not where when I'm just my, like, you can attest to this. I'm very odd. And like, when I go,
so am I. Look at that.
and like that's, I finally, for the literally, I'm 28, for the first time in my life with like Yeti, I feel like I can say I have found my people. And it's not because I manage to be a version of myself that they like. It's because we are all so incredibly authentically ourselves around each other that we just, it feels free. It really, like, I know it, this is the hardest thing. Like, your brain doesn't want to accept it when you're, especially when you're younger, because it's scary. It's, I don't know why, but it's really scary a lot of times to just really put yourself out there like that. But like, that's how you have to do that. That's how you find your people. And it is so much better to have 5 or 1 person who really you can be so free with than to have 100 people who like a version of you that you have to put on. Like, you want to perform a play every day, all day long, or do you want to just exist? And I think that's really what's a lot of times missed with belonging, especially for neurodivergent people, I will say, is we have this idea that belonging means changing yourself enough to finally fit in, when in reality it means being yourself enough that everyone else starts to be themselves around you. And then you can be like, oh, you're cool, you're rude, you're great, you're not nice to me. Like, because that was my biggest thing, is I was so scared of like pissing people off and losing people. And then I was like, but that, my best friend actually really gave me some advice when I was going through a hard friend breakup after I had kind of started to be myself a little more. And they didn't really love being seen in public with someone as odd as me. And they said, okay, but you're not abandoning them, because they had a bit of a dramatic breakup. And but I was like, but we've been friends so long, I feel so horrible about this. Like, even though they were really hurtful to me, am I a bad person for just ending, a decade-long friendship? And they said, but are you ending a friendship, or are you removing someone who's not nice to you from your life to make space for someone who's going to love you? And that really hit me, of like, we only have so much capacity for who we can interact with on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. Like, I love, phones are great. We can FaceTime, we can text. But as far as actual, like, meaningful relationships, you can't be having meaningful conversations with 100 people a day. So it just, and it happened too, is that someone did show up out of the woodwork that I'd wanted to get to know better. And now that I had the capacity, I was like, oh my God, I could have been being loved so well by this person this whole time, instead of begging this friend to pay attention to me.
Well, I feel that so much, Quinna. I think it brings up. I heard something on a podcast once, which I love. It's this or something better. Like, it's so hard when we're struggling and going through something. We think, oh, I have to fight to keep this, to maintain it. I can't, you feel like you can't survive losing, whether it's a person, a status, a position, or something. But it's like, it's those, I can easily look back and, again, I'm thinking big long term picture here, but like, I can kind of see, oh, like some of those tough moments where things, yes, did fall away, drop away, whatever language you want to use, did make space for better things. And I'm curious, I know we're about 5 minutes to the hour, but I do want to kind of, as we're getting towards closeout, we've talked a lot about really helping to build up young people, talking about what things they can do as they're entering the workforce, changing jobs, thinking about jobs, self advocacy. But so much of, I think, our jobs, Quinna, right, really focus on, and again, I will say a lot of these things are universal, but I'd love to kind of pick your brain for a few minutes on what are things you want adult professionals to hear in terms of burnout and boundaries and belonging. Because I got to tell you, the last couple months, what's been coming up consistently is just the recognition of seeing burnout at large systemically. I'm seeing burnout individually, and the juggling act, right? Of I'm trying to keep going on my own projects, creating positive change. What are your thoughts on everything I just shared?
Oh, I have several. As always, I think I think the number one thing I will say is that um, there's absolutely a cultural difference in different generations, and that's not a bad thing. But I do think it skews perspectives. Obviously, we come at everything from our own perspective, and I think there is kind of this idea that like burnout is just this kind of newfangled. Oh, you're just lazy. People don't want to work. Like, oh, whatever. It's just kind of, I think, minimized a lot. And so the number one thing I would say, like, to older professionals is if someone comes to you and says they're burned out or they're struggling or whatever, believe them. I think that's a huge thing, especially in the disability community. The idea of having to prove yourself constantly is more exhausting. Like, that's part of the burnout is like, if I'm having a really bad week, but I just was sick last week and then I'm also burned out, I'll feel like, well, I shouldn't text my boss because she's not going to believe, oh, 2 weeks in a row, she will. My boss will because she's a kind person and I'm also have proven myself to be an honest employee. But just believe people, meet them where they're at. I think at the end of the day, there's even data to back up the fact that if you treat your employees like humans, they're going to perform a lot better for you. I've told my boss before, like there are days where I'm like, hey, I can come into the office and pretend to work, but my brain is not in office mode. Can I stay home and work with my music on in the background and my sensory stuff? And so it's just that kind of honesty of like, hey, I'm human, you're human. It's not this big scary boss person. I think also at the end of the day, my advice again for young people, I love to use this analogy of I live in Colorado, so I drive a lot of mountain roads. And if I'm driving on a mountain road and someone with an emergency comes up behind me and they need to go 100 miles an hour and I don't feel safe going 100 miles an hour on this 30-mile-an-hour mountain road, I can feel 100% empathy. I can move my car over to the edge as far as I can. I can hope that they're okay and try to help them get past me. But at no point is it my responsibility to go 100 miles an hour to mitigate their emergency. My responsibility is keeping myself alive, and so is theirs. And that might sound kind of harsh, but it's really this idea of like, hey, I will do everything I can to help you up to the point of endangering or damaging myself. And I think we think of that in an office a lot of like, oh, I'm sick, but there's a deadline this week. Okay, that's, like, again, I don't mean this to sound flippant. Like, our jobs are important. What we do is important. But at the end of the day, it's just work. It's, that is nothing compared to your health, your happiness. So, and again, I know it's easy to hear that and be like, okay, but the reality is we got to pay our bills. But again, that's why I tell my advice to older employees is, have those relationships, believe those people when they need that help, because also, if you help mitigate burnout at week 1, that's going to have a lot better outcome than if someone comes to you at week 20 and goes like, if someone's starting to cramp at mile 4 of a marathon, a lot more can be done than someone who passes out at mile 20. Like it's kind of that. I'm just using analogies all day long, but I really think that at the end of the day, that's the most important thing is that we are humans first. And that's really the most important thing. And again, protect yourself, but just be honest. And if you get a negative reaction, that's not on you. That doesn't mean you're wrong. That just maybe means that person doesn't have either the coping skills or the empathy that they should at that point. I think one kind of final thought I want to leave with is I really have been thinking lately about this idea of like pain being inherently a negative thing. In society, you tell someone, oh, I'm in pain, and they immediately go, oh, I'm so sorry. And that makes sense. It sucks to be in pain. But I think that the perspective I've been offered through disability has really made me realize it feels like in abled culture, that's kind of like the whole point is avoiding pain, is let's do whatever we can to avoid pain. Pain is terrible. That's why it sucks to be disabled, because it's terrible to be in pain all day long. And like, don't get me wrong, it is. It sucks to be in pain all day long. I'm not a fan. But to me, it's just another, like, it's another experience. You know, if you were gone and someone said, hey, you can come back and spend a week with your loved ones, but you're going to have a headache the whole time, would you not do that? Would you not get to experience the sunrise one more time? Would you, like, I really think that we need to stop associating pain with like negativity or weakness, and more just, it's part of the human condition. We have good days, we have bad days, you're happy, you're sad, and there's acceptable forms of pain too, which is interesting. Like playing sports, you're risking pain. Falling in love, you're risking pain. Where I think it just kind of gives you a different perspective on, like, I guess what's important. Not to get all preachy, but I really just think that it's really helped me to come to terms with those truths of like, it might make things complicated, it might not be easy, but it is true that you have to just take care of yourself. You have to put yourself first. You can't, your company is not more important than you. So I don't know, that kind of didn't really have anything to do with your question. I've just been thinking about that a lot lately. And I think it's hopefully a helpful perspective to someone out there that, you know, this is, at the end of the day, that's really what it comes down to.
Yeah, no, it makes sense to me, Quinna, because I think I'm going to add, listen, we talked about the three B's, right? Boundaries, burnout, belong, and I'm throwing the fourth one we talked about, belief. Oh, boundaries, burnout, belonging, belief. Believing in ourselves, believing we can achieve things, having others believe in us. We all have the right to change our beliefs about ourselves, life, others. And that's what we talked about this whole podcast. But I really appreciated what you said about pain, because for me, whether it's been physical pain, emotional pain, you're right, it does suck in the moment, but I can see where at times that's helped me with decision making. Oh, like I feel, like, so it's just interesting where, like, as we talked about creating self fulfilled lives, our own agency, it's, oh, do I feel great? Oh, I want to move towards that. Oh, was this kind of crappy? Oh, I'm going to move away from that. And I think this could be a whole other conversation, but
Yeah.
just in terms of like decision making, like, and I get it. Like, we are making what, thousands of decisions a day. I feel like there's some stat like we make like thousands of decisions a
I think
day.
we make like more decisions in the first 5 minutes of being awake than our great grandparents did like all day or something. I remember that. I saw
Yeah,
that stat somewhere.
yeah, something like that, exactly. And it's making me think of like, okay, like there's things I clearly know I want to go after, but like I often tell young people and professionals too, like if you don't know something, that's okay. You and I love our conversations on there's such power in admitting I don't know something. But in terms of like those small, quiet, like internal feelings you can have, like I often tell people, like, don't forget, like, you know, even if you don't know exactly what you want, could you at least acknowledge what you don't want? Whether that be like in a job, like, hey, I know I don't want to, maybe you don't want a job in person, you want a remote job. Great. Like, add that to your list. So it really is like, it just made me think about like the going back to the awareness component of, oh, pain, decision making, beliefs, experiences, all that.
And I know we're over time, but I think that's so the what you don't want. That was something I struggled with forever. Like I grew up in a very yes and family. Like we did everything, you enjoyed everything. It was an arts family, it was a sports family. Like you just, you came along and you had a good time, or at least you didn't complain about it. And that was so powerful to me when I learned that, like, oh, I can actually decide that I don't like something and I don't even need to justify it. I don't want to do that. Why not? I don't. That's it. That's enough. And I think that, because when you ask what you want, I mean, that's a much more nebulous question than, there's infinite things you could want versus, okay, I don't want to be unhappy. I don't want to work a desk job. I don't, whatever it is. I think that's so much more tangible. I feel like that's where we should flip the script on the disability stuff is stop making our diagnoses deficit based and start making our IEPs deficit. Like, what do you not want to do at
Yeah.
school? No, but I also, you triggered another thought about the pain thing. That's really what I want to leave young people with, especially young disabled people, is it's, I know we've had a million Instagram videos about this idea of like, oh, we all have special needs, we all have different needs. And that's a great thought, but you don't really believe, like, you don't see it in practice as much. Where when you think about why are shoes a thing? Shoes are a thing because our feet hurt. As a society, we all decided we'd rather not walk on gravel, so we made shoes. And so it really is a good perspective to have in kind of that self-validation of like, just because it's not a problem the whole society is facing, as a society, we're all geared to want to avoid pain. And burnout is a form of pain because I also think people think burnout's like, oh, take a week off and come back. Burnout, you can need months, you can need years to recover from that. And I can't believe I haven't said that yet. But it really is kind of helpful to, it's almost like shock value to when you're in your head too much, where I'm like, oh, am I asking for too much to not come into work when I have a migraine? And it's like, would any of my coworkers come into work if they had a migraine? Probably not. What, like, there's, it goes back to the idea of acceptable pain. Like, as a society, we've decided we don't want our feet to hurt, so we're all going to wear shoes. But not everyone's joints hurt, so not everyone is assigned a wheelchair when they're born. You know, like it's that kind of. I liked where you just triggered a thought with that concept of like, there's acceptable pain, there's acceptable and unacceptable forms of pain in society, and you're the only one that needs to decide whether yours, and this goes beyond pain, I'm not just talking about, you know, if you're sick, but you get to decide what hurts you and what you need to avoid, and doesn't matter what anyone else thinks about it.
I could not have said it better myself, Quinna. Again, just I want to thank you, our listeners, for being here, sitting with Quinna and I as we were just, having this amazing conversation. So again, Quinna, thank you so much for coming on here. I think the world of you. I appreciate you. Any
Yes.
final closing thoughts before we wrap up for our time?
Oh, I should have something pithy prepared, but I don't. I'm just glad to be here. Thank you for listening to me yap and take you on 47 different train tracks of thought. I hope that y'all got something out of this. Take what you need, leave what's not for you. Grateful for anyone who's listening, and go be authentic. I guess actually, I will leave with this. I will leave by stealing from another creator. If any of y'all don't know of Elise Myers, I love her. She has this phrase, if I'm too much, go find less. And because that is, you know what? I'm too much. And it's one of my favorite things about myself. And I hope if you are too much and you're listening, it's one of your favorite things about yourself. Apathy is stupid. We need more people who are too much. Please go out there and be too much.
Yes. In my own way, I'll say I call it the buffet approach. Like, I want a little of everything. So, as someone who's also been called too much, I stand with you, Quinna, and anyone else who identifies as too much. More is more. So, on that note, thank you so much, Quinna, for being here. Thank you for our listeners. And until next time, bye, everyone.